Of black people have said they prefer the term African American, but the issue is far from settled.
I prefer to be called African American because African American reflects the true nature of my cultural heritage.
And I think it's better for you to be called black. You know, that it's different black. It's black Africans. It's black West Indians, you know. Black is beautiful, that's what I have to say.
I'm an American, whether I'm a black American or what, don't make any difference. I'm just an American.
You had the caucus in the election, they kept calling him Greek American, so being that every black person over here has African heritage, you know, we should be called African American.
Editorials in both black and white publications generally supported the call to use African American. The New York Times called it healthy archaeology, arguing that blacks may now feel comfortable enough in their standing as citizens to adopt the family surname American, and their first name, African, conveys a pride in cultural heritage that all Americans cherish. Said the Chicago Defender, as the world continues to shrink, Americans who speak to their Africanness with the African American title will likely find the cultural, education, and economic relationship with others much smoother. Opinion also varied among the guests we interviewed in our special Black History Month series.
I always thought that Afro-American or African American was the appropriate designation. And there is some beneficial effects in acknowledging the reality, the African heritage and the American presence. But that's not the critical issue. The critical issue is gaining power.
I believe that it is important for us as a people to think that we are connected to the world, because the African diaspora was for real. We were sent to different parts of the world.
Well, naturally, it's our heritage, but all of us here are really educated and exposed to American life, so is that we really are, we have to dig back for this ancestry. I mean, I'm not an African.
It's a very complicated question. So rather than argue over it, let's not give up black, let's not give up Africa. So in all the work that I do, the essays I write, I use both interchangeably.
For more on the story, we turn now to four other people with different views. Kwame Ture is an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, a group attempting to politically unite African people living in 113 countries all over the world. It was his call for black power in 1966, when he was known as Stokely Carmichael, that catapulted the term black into popular usage. Leon Winter is a copy editor for the Wall Street Journal, and last week wrote an article that appeared on the journal's op-ed page called "This African American Still Feels Black." J. Bruce Llewellyn is a businessman who owns the 8th largest Coca-Cola bottling company in the country. He also owns television station WKBW, an ABC affiliate in Buffalo. Ramona Edlin is president of the National Urban Coalition. She proposed the name change at the Chicago meeting of black leaders last December. And to you, Ms. Edlin, the current initiative is largely your brainchild. Why is it important to use that term and not black?
Charlene, we have an opportunity to renew values such as mastery and learning, the importance of the family, unity, which is of the utmost importance right now, at a time when our children couldn't be in more distress and turmoil, when we face a new century, and it's up to us to be sure that the problem of the 21st century is not also the problem of the color line, as Du Bois prophesied in 1903 this century would be.
But how does how does African American affect all of that?
Well, we see, going back to African cultural ties, to the land base that is our mother as crucial in this process. And what I'm hoping is that we can recreate some of the spirit of the movement years, particularly for the children, by going back to values which were stripped systematically from us, as we all know, when we were enslaved for 250 years in this nation.
Mr. Winter, you don't want to change from black.
No, well, I don't disagree that it is important for us to be cognizant of where we come from and the depth of our history that began before slavery. I just don't see the particular need in calling for renewal of the movement to leapfrog over the 400-odd years of history and of proud accomplishments that we can point to and indeed need to reacquaint our children with here in this country first. So I believe that it is important to teach the children and to, in general, imbue Black America with a knowledge of where it comes from, but to focus this effort on claiming what is ours here as Americans, which is the country that we are citizens of and where we pay our taxes.
All right, that was kind of a longer intro than usual, but it was kind of an interesting discussion. I'll probably end the show with that. Welcome to the Tuesday evening live stream. I'm just going to get right into it. Let me bring on my co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert.
Brother Jason Miles, what's going on? How are you living, brother?
I'm doing all right. I want to bring in our special guest for this evening. I'm very excited. I've been back and forth trying to book this young lady for a while now. She was I got to know her work from another friend, a personal friend of mine and a friend of show, Professor Kelly Dietz, Dr. Asia Leeds, professor is African Diaspora Studies. Am I saying it right?
Yes, you're saying it right. And shout out to Dr. Dietz.
Dr. Dietz. Yes, Dr. Dietz.
Yes.
I say Dr. Dietz. I've known Dr. Dietz before they were Dr. Dietz. Well, before they were Dr. Dietz. That's an older show from the mid 80s when there was an official name change. Pascal, do you remember the name change?
I remember the name change.
Did you get a memo?
I didn't get a memo, but I remember when the name was being floated, and I actually kind of remember a little bit of the discussion that happened around that conversation. I remember the name change process, and I also realized that some people are proposing name changes even today.
To what?
Oh, we don't have to go into that. we don't.
You're curious. Yeah.
What are the names?
Oh, I'm sure you've heard of the ADOS movement, American Descendants of Slaves. So
how does that movement touch your work at all? We're not ADOS people. At least I'm not. I can't speak for Pascal.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right.
How does it touch my work?
Yeah.
It doesn't really. My work is focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. However, I'm interested in, ideas of race, how people self-determine, how recreating Blackness connects to citizenship claims, which I think is at the heart of this naming and renaming, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to lay claim in certain geographies or spaces? It's really like a citizenship, it seems like, issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that in the 80s when this was a debate, right? I just kind of left the aftermath of it, where African American becomes this sort of standardization.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was brought up. And of course, there are people who are more comfortable with calling themselves African, etc. And so I think for me as a scholar, I think it's interesting how to think about Black people's agency and choosing what names make sense. This also shifts a lot in an individual's lifetime, right? I mean, the way we identify ourselves has a lot to do with where we are, and that can change over a lifetime. So I mean, it's an interesting conversation in general for me when we think about, when I talk about my own work. But as someone who is a Black person who is based for now in the United States, I say for now because I don't plan on this being a lifetime thing. I have interests, you know, myself as someone who is proudly Black, who is from this place, etc. This conversation, this debate, I think is very interesting. And I think there are also some real challenges here and some problematic things that I think come out of the politics of naming.
How do you feel about that, Pascal?
I mean, it's kind of fascinating for me, right? Because, I do remember when this debate was going on. I am also a child of the Caribbean. My parents are from Haiti. I was born in the United States. So I appreciate the Dr. Leeds' scholarship in terms of African Diasporic Studies and, her work in the Caribbean. And for me, I believe that people should have the agency to call themselves as they choose, whether it be Black, African American, African, or, I think that it's an individual right. The question becomes for me is that when the individual decision becomes an attempt to create a collective politics, as you know, you may not know, Asia, is that my kind of focus is on Black politics. I write for Black Agenda Report, and particularly class and how it functions around Black politics. So sometimes one of the questions I would ask about this is that, is this a petite bourgeois discourse? In other words, is this a discourse that the majority of Black people who are working class even are indulging in? Or is this really a discourse of Black elites who, through various types of, historical rationale and reasonings, are trying to reformulate their positionality in the United States? Because one of my main themes is that Black politics, and eventually this all becomes political, right? That Black politics is a class politics, and it's not necessarily a politics of a class that represents the majority interests of Black people who are working class or working poor. So one of the ways in which I would interrogate the discourse about name, who we are, who's this, and what the agenda becomes for Black people is that who exactly are the people who are promoting this type of discourse, and do they actually reflect the material interests of the majority of Black folk?
Absolutely. And that's really what a Kwame Ture is getting at in articulating Black power, right? That this idea of Blackness has to be rooted in the kind of power that will enable self-determination, right? That it is focused on sort of radically reimagining the realities of Black people. And so the debate, as you said, is really rooted in, what kind of politics is this? What does freedom look like? How do these conversations around the name, or what does Blackness mean, create a kind of, politics? I mean, that's the goal, right? It's not Blackness just to call yourself Black, but that it's a Blackness rooted in politics, right? Hence the idea of Black power. The goal is the power.
Right. No, absolutely. I agree that was the aspirational manifestation of Black power, was to get the power. What's fascinating, though, that in line with my initial critique, was that even Black power fell into becoming a kind of class politics of giving birth to the Black political class. So the first generation with the Congressional Black Caucus, the political conventions of Gary, Indiana in 72, and that aspiration of creating a kind of democratic, collective, Black participatory political project still sadly became captured by Black elites. There's a really good book by a friend of the show, Cedric Johnson, Race Leaders to Revolutionaries, that kind of explains how Black power becomes co-opted in the early 70s and becomes a project of kind of elite ethnic patronage politics, which results in the kind of politics that we have today in the Black community, where we have a kind of brokerage class or a Black political class that work as kind of comprador functionaries. As a Caribbeanist, I'm sure you're familiar with the comprador concept. It's something that we talk about, particularly in the colonial discourse of history. So I don't disagree with you at all that the aspirations that came out of that particular era, that movement that Kwame Ture, then known as Stokely Carmichael, was trying to advance. But again, one of the things that concern me is that how these attempts at collective advancement become co-opted by the internal realities that the class divisions amongst Black people reify themselves. And this is something we see even in the African diaspora, right? You can see this in the Caribbean, where you have a kind of, the neo-colonial elite that begin to take over the means of productions to an extent in the post kind of a colonial period, that end up almost becoming as effective oppressors as the colonial project was prior to independence. So I'm not trying to necessarily deny the capacity of self-determination, but I feel that those questions somewhat complicate the narratives and the perceptions we have of quote unquote collective unity and unified racial cohesion.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really the desire of a global elite and corporations to maintain power. I mean, this is why we see Black movements so easily co-opted, right? How we can talk about Black people being murdered in the street, and at the same time there are these commercials and sort of celebrations of Blackness. Every corporation has these banners or slogans, right? We see you. I mean, we clearly see how easily power subsumes these representations. I mean, I guess that's the point we're both trying to make, is that the goal has to be more than simply categories of representation. I think that's what we're both saying here, because we see how easily capitalism subsumes, subverts, these kinds of movements that dare to challenge the status quo. We see this every day.
Absolutely. Very well said. Very well said. I'm actually interested in what are your focus areas of study in terms of African diasporic study, in terms of the Caribbean and linking the Caribbean to the Black American experience and whatnot. I would really love to hear, because I find that whole study quite fascinating.
Yeah, well, my work is in Central America. I'm working on a project, a longstanding project in Costa Rica. And really the genesis of that project was just seeing how important Marcus Garvey's UNIA was in Costa Rica for those, Afro-Caribbean migrants who are labor migrants who are coming for a number of reasons, including, the United Fruit, banana plantations, et cetera. And they're also, building the Panama Canal, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just saw in the archives how important these Pan-African ideas were. I mean, there's something about being displaced through migrations, leaving home, but also how these Caribbean migrations are themselves a kind of diaspora, and something like a UNIA links Black people in different locations going through similar things. And so my interest is thinking about Pan Africanism and the kind of multi-sided citizenship, I would say, how on the one hand, people organize globally, diasporically across national borders. But then on the other hand, they kind of use this language, in the case of Garvey, a redemptive language, redefining Blackness, to then make citizenship claims in Costa Rica, which they were denied for a long time. I mean, we're also talking about a group of people that for a while were stateless, undocumented people. And so I think about how citizenship means multiple things for Black people in diaspora. And so I'm, those are my interests in Central America, but just broadly, how Black people move across borders and how they organize themselves to claim different types of belonging, right? National, but also a larger diasporic belonging, which can be very powerful if you find yourself in a place like Costa Rica, where Black people numerically represent a minority. But I'm also, interested in how this continues on today, and how, when we're talking about where is Afro-Costa Rica, where does it start and stop, we've got to also talk about Brooklyn, New York, right? And how there are families that are spread out across this sort of circum-Caribbean space, right? That you also have family in Colón, in Panama, or in other locations, right? Family back home in Jamaica or wherever. So I'm interested in, global Blackness, but also how people get together and what that means, like what Black citizenship means to people, particularly those who don't have it, right? And I mean, I think that's so relevant to today when we talk about the struggles of being undocumented, displaced, etc. I think in the conversation in the US, we tend to erase Black migrants and Black undocumented people. So those are my interests there in Central America, and Garveyism plays a pretty big role in all of it.
Where do you see the Pan Africanist project in the 21st century in terms of its importance, its utility, generally speaking, as a project and as a politics?
It's such an interesting question, right? Because first, let me just say that I'm not a scholar of 21st century Pan-Africanism. So I can't, I'm not basing this on like a study or data that I've looked at, as a scholar of this time. So I just want to make that clear. And I also think there's a struggle I face when trying to gauge what does Pan-Africanism mean today? Does it resonate with people, particularly those based in the United States? I mean, it's so hard to gauge, partly because, as we know, Twitter isn't the real world. And so, right?
Say it again.
Twitter is not the real world. So all of the, diaspora wars, which, as a lot of people point out, are really just attempts to be seen, right? That may or may not align with the way you actually think and move, right? We're talking about an era of where people want to get insta famous and be popping on Twitter and will do anything for it. So it's hard to know what is really being captured, what true sentiments are being captured. And of course, we're all in our homes and kind of isolated in interesting ways right now. So it's hard to gauge what Pan-Africanism means to people, and particularly people who kind of are outside my scholarly bubble, or, thinking about the certain kinds of class privilege I have based on, kind of people I talk to about ideas. My friend circle is really well traveled, and so has the privilege of moving about the globe, which is not the reality of most people. So I think it's easy to think that, and sometimes I think this too, I'm like, these ideas like the ADOS ideas seem to really be spreading and taking off, but I'm not sure, because I'm only basing that on Twitter hashtags and the fact that I keep seeing all these Black people with American flags in their bio. But the extent to which that represents a mass of people, I'm not sure. You know what I mean?
How do you feel? Here's a question. How do you feel that, because as a student of California public school education, as I am, we don't learn a lot about the diaspora of Africans. And it was only really, I'll be honest, through my travels as a touring musician to like see, like I remember the first time I met Black people in the UK, I was kind of like, hey, how'd you guys get here? And they were like, well, same way you got there. They were and also going to Brazil. I was actually shocked at how large the African diaspora is throughout Brazil. I mean, you can read about it, I definitely understood the work of people like Marielle Franco when I was down there. I was down there in 2019, so she had been assassinated already. But you understand how important that work is down there because you see how large that diaspora is. So when I look at movements like ADOS, part of me thinks it's kind of a failure of basic public education to really inform people on what happened during slavery, because I think so many just don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a very intentional move, right? That's like a Cold War. That's like a result of Cold War. It's this anti-globalism, anti-internationalism that shapes everything from schools, et cetera. Because if we think about what Black people were doing, how they were communicating with each other, in the periods kind of, leading up to the 50s and 60s even, there was this kind of intentional camaraderie across borders of nation, language, etc. If you look at Black newspapers from the time, we're talking anywhere from 20s, 30s, 40s. These are what I focus on. You see this awareness of what's happening in the globe. I mean, in my archive, right, Black newspaper in Costa Rica, English language newspaper, when Italy attempted to colonize Ethiopia, they were ready to enlist to send themselves from Costa Rica to Ethiopia, right, as an example of this like awareness of what was going on in the Black world. And so we see very intentionally that the Cold War pushback on this kind of global awareness of connecting across borders. And so I think if we talk about an ADOS, or I think there's another way they're called FBA, something like that, that's really the product of a Cold War domestication, right? Falling back to nation state borders, this kind of fear of the international, this, how do you call it? Fear of things that are quote unquote foreign.
Mm-hmm. A provincialization, kind of like a
provincialism as well. That this is the aftermath. And to your point, I mean, we can absolutely say that, yeah, I mean, as Assata Shakur famously says, right, schools aren't going to give you, they're not going to give you the tools that you need to, overturn them, right? And so we know that what we're taught is kind of make us fall in line, but I think you're absolutely right to highlight that. And with my own students who, are so lucky to have a full required year of African Diaspora Studies in their first year, they're blown away by the reality that, the majority of captured Africans in the transatlantic slave trade went to Latin America and the Caribbean. I mean, most of whom hear this for the very first time, right? That Brazil has the largest number of Black people outside of the African continent, et cetera. All these things that you brought up. And it becomes this, not just aha moment, but again, you're thinking about a larger Black networks outside of the United States. And that impacts you psychologically, because then you aren't limited to this conversation about being a quote unquote minority, right? That you recognize, the sort of power in numbers of non-white people in the world. And that in of itself becomes this idea that has a lot of radical potential for students. But yeah, I would say that we are, miseducated. And a lot of this is the result of a Cold War domestication and an inward nationalism that, being internationalist and globalist and Marxist you were punished for these things harshly, assassinated or imprisoned, maligned, loss of career. There were real ramifications. And so this is the result.
you know what?
Go ahead, Pascal.
I was going to say that's, you know, and you've made some really excellent points, but do you think that particularly the post-World War II project of American exceptionalism helps foster this rather narrow view of Black identity that we see in the United States, where the knowledge that there were even slaves from the African continent brought to places like the Caribbean, or brought South America or Latin America, to even in larger numbers than they were brought in the United States. Do you think that buying into that, because you talked about the American flag, do you think that part of this kind of reactionary discourse of narrowness of identity is premised on kind of attaching oneself to this kind of idea of American exceptionalism, or America as a center of the world and the universe, as, you know, the great empire in that as well? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This ideology, if you will, of American exceptionalism shapes this kind of nationalism that we see, this xenophobic nationalism that we see. And I think it's also part of the American exceptionalism narrative is that the civil rights movement succeeded, right? Here we are, fully incorporated into this US body, and that's the story. And of course, you know, I always talk to my students about this. There's a way in which we're trained to celebrate successes that we haven't yet won, you know? So yeah, I think the American exceptionalism narrative is a big part of this. And also, which you mentioned, this sort of celebration of US empire, which for me, seeing Black people kind of celebrate the supremacy and dominance of the US is really alarming. I mean, because not only is that harmful, is it harmful globally, but also you experience the repercussions of US imperialism at home. So I've noticed, and again, I haven't done any kind of study of 21st century Pan Africanism. And I know very well that what I see on Twitter, you know, doesn't necessarily represent what's happening on the ground and how people feel, how masses of people feel. But I do notice this entanglement of a kind of xenophobia, US exceptionalism, and also celebration of empire. And then I would say too, this sort of uncritical idea, like a sort of uncritical take on this idea that US Black cultural forms are globally dominant, right? And without interrogating the reason why this is, that it's through domination, it's through military bases, you know, that
propaganda.
Yeah, that help. And we don't even want to start talking about the jazz ambassadors, right?
Hello, yeah, I wrote an article about that, yes.
Yeah, but this celebration of this sort of idea of US, of Black American cultural forms as dominant, and everyone else is just kind of mimicking what Black Americans do. And I think that also relies on a misunderstanding of Black liberation movements, you know, a timeline that's all messed up. Because, you know, Dr. King clearly said that in a letter from a Birmingham jail, that while Asian and African countries are gaining independence, we're still begging for a cup of coffee at a lunch counter, right?
Well, what's even more fascinating when you're talking about that is that there's very little discussion about the role of the global South independence movement in the face of the impending Soviet Union being a motivation behind the United States in facilitating the civil rights movement. That this all exists in a global Cold War context in which America is very aware and very conscious of its image abroad in the global South, in the Black and brown world, because it's being challenged by the rise of the Soviet Union as a potential model of independent nation management, and it basically is worried about its market share in those areas and its need to basically, tamp down that domestic Jim Crow politics to not get in the way of business.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And in addition, I'm also talking to this sort of misinformation about the past, this idea that the rest of the Black world follows the lead of Black Americans. It's this kind of problematic model of like a progress. It's almost like a Eurocentric framing, right? This linear notion of progress with Europe as the model, but in this weird formation of a certain kind of inward-looking Black nationalism, it's this idea that the rest of the world mimics, that the U.S. Black people are leaders of the Black world, that we've advanced and sort of solved problems of race more than any others, et cetera, which we know is just not accurate. And also to the point that I was trying to make, that Black people inspired each other. And this is so powerful. This is what is so powerful for me about studying Pan Africanism in a historical framework, is to see these moments of solidarity that we needed in order to gain, to fight and win. It was this exchange, solidarities, conversations that were at the center of things. And when you're in a place like the United States, where, we know that we're not trained to think about the world, right? If we think about how few people, we have little access to even learning languages. This is all legacy of the Cold War, right? This inward looking reflection, but that impacts and sort of misrepresents the past. And I think that misrepresentation of the past really fuels a lot of these sort of xenophobic movements.
I think that's a very, very, very good point. For example, the whole concept of people not realizing that even in North America, when you're talking about quote unquote ADOS or centrality of American descendants of slaves, do people understand that between the Caribbean and North America, there was an exchange of Africans back and forth, and how many of the quote unquote American descendants of slaves probably have Caribbean ancestors amongst them as well? I mean, this is the interrelated narratives in history are completely obfuscated when we get to this kind of reactionary discourse.
And as if these nation state borders are fixed and neat. I mean, it really imagines these neat boxes that just don't exist. I mean, and that's, one of the sort of main critiques of the 1619 project that I saw from historians was that, obviously we know that before the British arrived to colonize in North America, there was the Spanish Florida. And there, in those first numbers of captured Africans, we also see the first rebellions. This is in the 1520s, I think 1526, something like that. But any attempt to carve these lines and make these boxes, there's always more to be said. And I think anytime you try to siphon it and think within nation state borders only, you're missing a large part of the story. So I think that's the work that diasporic analysis, or we might call it a diaspora lens, right, or a transnational lens, does. That it reveals how power moves. And anytime you're talking about colonies, you're obviously talking about a transnational endeavor. And so I think we then peel back those layers, and we also have to talk about how complex reparations would be.
Oh wow, you're spiking the football here.
I mean, you're saying words that we promised we weren't saying. We weren't going to bring up Jessica Cruz, and we weren't going to say reparations. So now that you let that cat out of the bag, people keep saying, "Didn't Jessica Cruz work in this African Diaspora Studies?" I was like, "I'm not sure."
I don't know that lady.
Jean Bajlan sent me a message while I'm doing production stuff. Jean Bajlan sends a message. She goes, "Hey, see if she knows that Jessica Krug lady." I'm like, "Who the hell's Jessica Krug?" And he said, I was like, "Oh, the lady that lied and said she was black, and then lied and said she was Latin, and then said, you got me."
My first time hearing about her was her being dragged on Twitter. I do not.
Oh. So you guys never came. Maybe she looked different when she had her like soul man thing going, and like a afro wig. And...
If anyone knows me, you know the West Baltimore is just like right under the surface. You know what I'm saying?
Are you from? I was going to ask because you went to Cal. You went to Cal-Berkeley.
I did.
But you're not from here.
Baltimore, born and raised.
You're from Baltimore.
Yeah.
Be more.
Yeah. I just say that to say that in Baltimore, we don't play those kind of games. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm gonna say something. Yeah.
So would you have got real Baltimore honor in a because you know how there's panels, you guys are on a panel, you'd be like, is that motherfucking punk ass Krug, frontin' ass Krug?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I just know her from the op-eds and the Medium pieces.
Oh wow.
She eventually quit her teaching job, right?
Oh, I think she got fired. Right?
I mean, would you really want to take the class with the lady that fronted?
No, absolutely not. No, I think it's the right thing to do. And I mean, it's a real problem because we know that there are still so few Black women who are in academia. And so this is what makes something like that so ridiculous. And that's why I say, like, when I bring up West Baltimore, it's like, for me, that's like almost like a fight.
Major violation.
Yeah, violation for sure. Yeah, but anyway.
People were saying the name on the chat, and I was like, "Don't bring it up."
Yeah.
But
you did bring up reparations, and
oh shit! Look, Pascal, we're gonna lose the few Twitter followers that we have.
No, I mean, I would like to hear Professor Leeds, elaborate on her thoughts in terms of how the politics
and on that note,
reparations discourse are shaping this kind of diasporic consciousness, if you will, in terms of who's making claims that other people should have or shouldn't have, or who should be included or who should not be included. I'd like to hear your thoughts on, the rather contentious way this is shaping out to be.
Yeah, y'all trying to send those U.S. flag people in my mentions, but I'll just say this. I'm no scholar of reparations. I think that there's a lot of work, and there's been a lot of work done that I want to honor. You know what I mean? And my questions though are that it feels like it poses itself as a really simple problem to solve when I think that it's much more complex. I mean, exactly. What if Black people, and if we can just focus on the descendants of people whose ancestors were enslaved in this territory, right? Got what they were due, the United States would cease to exist.
Thank you. You're asking you're coming to a very good point here. Is that is reparations as a project of making the aggrieved whole within the capitalist paradigm that exists in America even possible?
It wouldn't exist. I mean, if you're really talking about what your people are owed, it would be the end. So that's the point that I think a lot of, particularly people who are anti-capitalists, are making. This desire to be made whole in a capitalist framework within the United States, and then you're still celebrating empire, right? You want to have money, but you want the U.S. to still function in the same way. It's just, it's a claim that I find that I have a lot of questions for. At the end of the day, though, again, I don't know the details of where the reparations conversation has moved, where it is right now, what are the policy possibilities. I don't know any of that, but I have real questions about how this looks. And then beyond the specifics policy-wise, why so much focus on so-called Black descendants of people who have roots elsewhere outside of the U.S.? Why this hyper focus on people? And we're really talking about, statistically, people who are recent immigrants or who have recent immigrant heritage, second generation, et cetera. The numbers aren't that big. So I'm troubled that a conversation about reparations, about so-called righting these wrongs, is so hyper focused on with this kind of xenophobia and with this line drawing. If we are really being real, the U.S. owes reparations to Liberians. What about to Congolese after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba? To Haitians, what about Black Puerto Ricans? And on and on and on. So,
and what about Puerto Rico in general? I've heard that discussion actually for Puerto Rico in general, which is something people don't really talk about. Puerto Rico actually, kind of a big reason why they fought in the first place is they thought they were going to be finally independent of the Spanish, and never got their freedom, so to speak, and they're still a colony, if you will, and a colony that's just being really shat upon, and historically has been really shat upon, and by the U.S. And there's people there that don't want statehood. They'd rather have independence than statehood because, right now there's American corporations using Puerto Rico as a tax haven, extracting a lot of the resources. There's different crazy labor laws there that still make stuff made in America, even though they might not have to follow the same labor laws we have. So there's a claim that Puerto Ricans can lay very justifiably for reparations.
Right, and that's where my question comes in, and how just revealing how really complex this all is, because if you're someone with a U.S. flag in your bio and celebrating, U.S. empire, then you also have to think about the U.S. as an empire when you're talking about reparations claims. They are entangled. So it's something that I haven't heard. I haven't seen any kind of conversation on what this would look like. I haven't seen any people who identify as ADOS discuss this issue, but rather take an approach that, first us, based on these nation state borders, et cetera, and then they can make their own kind of claims. But, power is transnational. This is how it operates, that the U.S. arose to dominance via colonialism and neo-colonialism. So the idea that you can sort of disentangle these things so neatly and sort of have something in this box and another in this, it's just unrealistic. That's not how power operates. That's not how money is made.
Jason, do you have any further comments?
Oh, sorry, I was doing my production job, hoping that you would do your host job.
Really?
By the way, I have African on my screen.
Was that? Oh, that's what's up.
Now you're at Spelman.
Yes, I am.
So right now there's a reparations fight in the chat that you started, Dr. Leeds, and the reparations fight is over who gets it. And Professor Jean Bajlan says that Kurds need reparations.
Sure.
Yeah.
A whole lot of reparations that need to be paid, I think, is the point.
Kurdistan needs some U.S. reparations. That is the point. You know, someone else said in the chat, actually kind of seriously, Joanna said Hawaii, Guam, American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands. Some of these places are physically fucking sinking.
Well, the argument, I think, to play, reactionary advocate that the ADOS people would make is that we built this country. It's built on our labor. This is a repayment for labor extracted without compensation, and this country would not exist without our labors, and we deserve to be compensated. This is justice. And I think that's the argument that they would make.
I mean,
well, I think
the
that
Hawaiians didn't build Hawaii, which is part of this country, Puerto Rico, the exploitation that still happens in those places to this day.
I mean, I think it's a very myopic, profoundly myopic, narrow view of the history of the United States and how many different ways and things shaped the development of this country. I mean, I think for me, as you know, we talked about this before, as you know, a child of Haiti, and I see people with solidarity with Haiti. You know, the Louisiana territories was double the size of this country and made the United States the country that it is today. Doesn't happen without the Haitian Revolution. So do we get a quantum merit reparations for the whole western half of the U.S. that goes to Haiti as a result of the economic growth and the largesse that the United States got? I mean, that's how kind of, ahistorical this whole discourse becomes in terms of like who contributed what and who didn't contribute what to development of what is ultimately a project of empire, a settler colonial project that becomes eventually an empire that, is particularly making its wealth through its international capacity to enforce its will on the world. So my position is not at all that reparations, isn't deserved or shouldn't. That's not my argument. What I'm saying is that to make to echo what Dr. Leeds is saying, to make these kind of fast and loose, quick drawn lines about what's in, what's out, what's here, what's not, is profoundly ahistorical. And I wondered, I would like to ask Professor Leeds, is that why haven't the more senior scholars of American history, American slave history, or diasporic studies made the corrective intervention to explain why this whole narrative is divorced from the reality of what exactly made the United States a country?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just say all solidarity to Haiti. See that in the chat, and we know that the U.S.'s empire's heavy hand in Haiti, has created the situation, installed presidents, etc. So we always want to give props to Haiti, which inspires the Black world. But just remind me again what your question was. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Why are not the senior academics in these various disciplines, whether it's diasporic studies, history, history of the transatlantic slavery, why isn't there some kind of collective corrective of this narrative that's being painted, this rather xenophobic, myopic, ahistorical narrative that has become so social media prevalent?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I think I see, and of course, again, we have to always say that Twitter doesn't represent everything that's happening, but I do see scholars doing the work of challenging some of the claims, the foundational claims of this kind of ADOS nation state project. So I see that happening. I'm not sure what's going on outside of it, if there are collections that are coming out, etc. But I will say too that just the way geographically that history in U.S. universities does often fall back into those nation state logics. And I know that diaspora is like this word, and it's like sexy in the academy to do diaspora work and transnational. But for the most part, we're talking about a lot of scholarship that falls within the nation state frame. And so, I think that's part of our work too, is to kind of push back on those logics and reveal how slippery and complex they are. And there are obviously scholars doing that work. Now, I don't know of any concerted effort by senior scholars to kind of lay out a history of why this position is problematic. I haven't necessarily seen that. I have seen a certain senior scholar who seems to work with ADOS. But I don't know of any concerted efforts. However, again, like I said, I think part of the challenge here is that academia and the sort of university system and the way that it approaches history within these neat geographies doesn't necessarily train our students to think, to trouble the borders, oftentimes doesn't even give them the language. And so I think that we can do much better with that. And even when I think of just how, for example, training your students to use the United States instead of America, simple things like that, that have you kind of reflect on borders and reflect on sort of hemispheric conversations, I think are sometimes missing in the way that, for example, an African-American history might be framed. I think there's room there to kind of do that intervening work. If we think more critically about borders and also colonialism, I think this is something that I see with my own students, is that they struggle to conceptualize the US as the product of a settler colony. They think of colonialism as being this thing that sort of happens elsewhere. And so I think too, that there could be real possibility in really training US-based people to think about colonialism, what it means, how it operates. And so with that knowledge, you'll already begin to push back against, have a critique of some of these ideas. You'll have a lens that, challenges, some of what we assume that the nation state so neatly sort of packages, if that makes any sense. So, I just think that there's a lot more to be done. And I think that in the space of the university and Black studies should be an important site to be doing this work. There's a lot of potential, but there's also, I think, missed opportunities also. Yeah.
So
I don't think I think it's someone's talking about the American flag. It's more of a probably relating it to the ADOS.
Yes.
Kind of how me and Pascal. If you guys could only hear the way we talk about people with certain things in their Twitter profiles, you guys probably wouldn't listen to the show.
So for me, the U.S. flag, gives me pause for sure. So
yeah, take it with a grain of salt, I think. And again, I haven't heard of FBA. You said the other one's FBA,
Foundation of Black Americans.
Foundation.
Oh, I'm in my head trying to figure out what that could be.
Yeah. So
any close to that?
Yeah. So the other thing with that as well that I see, and again, it's so hard to know if these identities are really permeating or not. I mean, who can tell, right? But I see this conversation about Black people, FBA or ADOS, being indigenous to the Americas.
That's a whole other narrative that is being pushed There is a narrative. No, there's a narrative being pushed that the Black Americans who make these claims are indigenous to North America, meaning, i.e., they never came from Africa at all, as in they were here first.
How'd they get here?
No, they were here before. They are the original Native Americans.
Oh, word. Africans.
No, they.
Well, I mean, I see a lot of this as a kind. I mean, there's a very not so subtle aspect of this discourse that is very much rooted in denying and completely alienating any sense of Africanity at all from Black people. Like, particularly if you notice the whole discourse about the only reason why we're here is because those Africans sold us into slavery. I mean, this whole cartoonishly reductive analysis of the transatlantic slave trade that creates this kind of like, it's their fault they're here and we're here, we're sold us out, as if the notion of Black identity exists within a continent with over 3,500 tribes, languages, with no fixed geographic borders, that were being onslaughted by Western invaders, that you just reduce your whole plight to those Africans sold us into slavery. So my humble opinion, and Dr. Leeds, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that I find that a lot of this antagonism is actually as a consequence of contemporary conflicts that African American, particularly in the university settings, are finding with African immigrant students in terms of competition or in the workspace. So to me, this is actually kind of a bourgeois discourse. It's not a working class Black discourse at all. It's a university trained kind of discourse in which you see people talking about how the Africans or the Afro-Brits are replacing us in films. There's a whole article in Counterpunch about this.
I saw that. Yeah. Mad.
Let's also not neglect that this whole discourse does not exist without the rise of Donald Trump. I saw the timeline in terms of when all of this started to transpire. It is very much in correlation to the rise of the anti-immigrant xenophobic discourse that starts off in the Trump era. And there's a direct correlation between the phenomenon in Black spaces and what was the dominant discourse in the Trump administration. That's not deniable at all. So, I'd like us to, discuss and listen. Immigrants can be, horribly, racist, anti-Black, or antagonistic to Black Americans. There is an internal problem there that we can address, but how this kind of this xenophobic angst turns out into this really like anti-African reality is something I've been witnessing as well, and it manifests itself in this phenomenon you're talking about how like we didn't even come from Africa. We've been here since the beginning of time.
Yeah. There's so many things, because one, I think that there's this level of erasure to indigenous groups that is so violent in that framework. And then it's this just kind of shoddy evidence based on some descriptions of copper-colored skin and just, but I think that it also connects to sort of longer, older conversations, right? And, some people who believe in this will point to Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus, which, most scholars of Mesoamerica have debunked, right? And I'm also reminded too of this kind of history of Black origin stories that don't start on the African continent. The Nation of Islam, this idea of the Afro-Asiatic Black man, and a real disdain for kind of Africanness in the Nation of Islam through this origin story. So there are these sort of histories, for sure. I think there's definitely there's obviously many troubling aspects to all this. One is this erasure of indigenous communities, which, really many of whom are struggling, right? And also this crude, almost like a crude means to piecing together a history with very little evidence and data. It's a lot, but I think pointing to your point that you made about this sort of perceived class competition, that's super interesting, because we do have to discuss the realities that in elite spaces and institutions, oftentimes there is this sort of overrepresentation of Black people with, immigrant heritage, etc. So that's definitely a conversation, to be had. But I just find the position to take really troubling. And also, as you mentioned, that the sort of insults are multi-directional, right? And that again goes back to this idea of the diaspora wars, hurling insults at each other. Really, just to me, especially in COVID, people are dying. It just is so off-putting. But here we are. I mean, we have ADOS, I guess they're called, and FBA have sort of created new origin stories for themselves. And it's troubling to me, for sure. And also this issue that you all mentioned about framing the transatlantic slave trade as the sort of fault of Africans who sold their people. I mean, the carelessness to not even think about those families that were disrupted, right? Families who had kidnapped people. What do you think they went through? It posits a real, there's a real lack of care in all of these discussions, I think, is a thread here. That is so hurtful and harmful, because colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade destabilized all of us on both sides of the Atlantic. So I think these positions, are, one, just not rooted in evidence and the reality, which is complex, but also are so harmful and hurtful. And I'm just not with that.
I'm not a fan. If you're an ADOS person and you're gonna get mad that Pascal and I are not really fans of the movement, then don't come on here kind of quoting silly rhetoric, because I don't know what the bullshit rhetoric means. If you have something to say, you can say it. People actually write things out. Don't just come in here with silly lines. The whole thing about thank you, Mom, for telling me that it's okay that I'm not ADOS and I'm still your son. Thank you. I appreciate it. My mom says I'm still her son. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? That we're still family. We don't have to fight. I'm not gonna fight with my mom about something like that. But it's just, when you start talking about reparations, it's one of those conversations that to me didn't exist in 2012. And when we talk about like the presidential run of Bernie Sanders and him talking about redistributive politics, all of a sudden, 2018 or so, everybody was talking about reparations. And if you brought up Bernie Sanders' name, the first thing a lot of Black people would tell me was, well, he's not for reparations. He's not for HR 40. I'm like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Like, what do you want? What do you want? What's going to make you happy? You tell me what's going to be fair, because I actually have a very good friend of mine whose father was a child, but was taken away in Japanese internment and got a very small pittance of a reparation check. And first of all, there wasn't that many people left to pay out that actually got that were involved in that. And Pascal has mentioned before, not on air though, that he thinks Joe Biden is going to propose some sort of reparations to Black people.
No, my larger point is that where we have seen an example of reparations to any aggrieved party making that particular group whole and taking them out of poverty. Native Americans are still suffering disproportionately from poverty. I don't know. I mean, who exactly has ever gotten reparations? That reparations has been the means to completely transform them as a collective group of people and taking them out of any kind of adverse economic reality. There's no precedent for that.
And I think another thing people don't understand is like it's not like there's been some real interesting articles, and I don't know why they never really caught on, in the LA Times about white people taking advantage of money that's been earmarked for like Native American companies to do certain work. Like, okay, we're going to set this money aside for, get a Native contractor in here first. White companies take that money first. Not all the time, but more often than you think.
I mean, again, I'm going to make
hundreds of millions of dollars that's supposed to be set aside. So it's silly to think that we know who's going to get it. That's what the main question, who's going to get it? And someone said, it's simple. It's a debt. Well, then who gets it?
My position is not even to debate whether reparation is old or not old. I think that there's clearly a history of wealth extraction that needs to be addressed. What I'm saying is that what this becomes is basically a position in which you have an aggrieved party making a demand on the ruling class. What we have to understand is that the terms upon which that grievance is going to be addressed is going to be determined by what the ruling class is going to allocate. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying is that when you make reparations the sole determining factor in terms of what you're expecting to make whole, what you're allowing is for a group of individuals, i.e. the ruling class, to make a determination on what that policy will be, expecting that they will do so in your best interest. And what I'm saying is that I don't deny at all the correctness of reparations. But what I'm saying is that the belief that it will be shaped in a way that is somehow going to just at the snap of a finger take Black people out of poverty, social dislocation, mass incarceration, and all of the functionality that exists in maintaining the utility of capitalism in American society that renders Black and brown people to disproportionate, redundant labor as a function of capitalism. To expect that will be reconciled by the ruling class with reparations under a capitalist paradigm, I think lacks a certain thinking through of what's going to happen here. So my position is that not only do I believe that Black people will get reparations, I believe that they will get something called reparations. My question is, what happens when you get it and it changes nothing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's somebody in here, this Bilal Shabazz, that is very upset that we're talking about reparations, and apparently we need a reparations expert to talk to us about reparations because we just don't understand how they work.
Okay. Something that has not happened yet.
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
make-believe politics.
I think we're clearly all saying that there is a debt, that this project was built on Black labor and the control of Black people. Mm-hmm. I think the question is, to what extent will a government built on and that continues to thrive on Black suffering going to make this right? And going back to my earlier point, paying what's owed would bankrupt this place, because the number, I mean, how do we even figure it out? It would be huge, massive. There wouldn't no longer be a United States. So I think these questions are valid. I think you're supposed to be asking questions about policy proposals or the things that social movements take seriously. Like, we are human beings and we have brains for a reason. So I think that these questions are important to ask. I just wouldn't, I think as you're mentioning, Pascal, I just wouldn't, how can you trust the elite in a place sort of designed on your oppression to do anything significantly to change your position. I mean, think about all the industries that are based on Black suffering and Black poverty and et cetera. I mean, it's so built in to the fabric, to the institutions, to the financial industries, et cetera. To really right the wrong would be overthrow of this place if we're keeping it real. That it's not any payout that would keep the United States intact. That doesn't.
My position here is that that people people want to demand reparations. That is their right. I'm not telling people not to do it. What I'm saying is that what is going to be necessary to change the condition of African Americans is a multifaceted policy agenda of a variety of initiatives that will have to restructure the whole economy of American society.
It wouldn't exist any longer.
This is a country. We have to keep this in mind.
But
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Pascal.
My larger point is that if you assume that simply getting a check cut to you is going to repair everything that ails Black America, I really would want you to think about that in terms of how the capitalist system in America works. When you get that capital, when you get those funds, they're going to be spent in a system that's already based on funneling wealth to a 1%. Are you going to be talking about creating a separate economy from the way in which capitalism functions to keep those funds within your community? I mean, again, I'm not even going into the whether it happened, well or not. What I'm saying is that what exactly is the long-term consequence of assuming that this is a silver bullet for all the problems that ail Black America?
Because it's a great way to not talk about capitalism.
I mean, I think it's a great way to reduce actual policy to slogans.
Yeah.
And also to an agenda that easily becomes manipulated by whatever political administration that it can say. I mean, listen, what if Joe Biden says, okay, I'm setting up a situation where here, each one of you get $10,000. That's more than anyone's giving you in 100 years. You've got your reparations, goodbye. No one else is giving you this much. What happens then?
Yeah. And that goes back to our larger point about how easily, and this is how capitalism functions. It co-ops so almost seamlessly. And I think that's the point that you're making, is that these claims oftentimes get sort of co-opted by whatever party it is, or it falls back into this American exceptionalism model and narrative. I think this is an important conversation. I mean, I think anyone who takes a political position should kind of be thinking about all of these questions and challenges, that we've brought up. And I think, again, all of us acknowledge the debt that is owed to Black Americans and also Black people for whom the U.S. empire has trampled.
Sorry. Apparently, Bilal Shabazz.
Yes, I do.
I forgot Pascal was the president of ADOS.
No, it's not the case. not at all. At all. No, I mean, the thing is, though, it's funny. I mean, my whole thing about this reparation thing is that it's amazing that so many people got triggered by a Ta-Nehisi Coates article, because none of these Negroes were talking about reparations before that article.
Nobody was talking about reparations.
That's a fact.
Until 2014, and this fool writes his which, it's a great flowery essay. I'm not gonna lie. I read Color of Law. There's things I like about Color of Law. There's things in Color of Law that you can't deny as far as facts. But to think that this is it, right? Reparations. This is a country that is fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage, We still don't have any sort of standardized health care. This is the same country that would rather let people die over a virus. And you think all of a sudden they're going to get righteous and woke and be like, yeah, we got to give these Negroes some money. Why do you think Japanese people got money? Again, and it's pretty much what Pascal said. Here's $10,000. This is more than anybody else gave your monkey ass.
Even if it's $100,000, even if it's $1 million per black person, within a capitalist economic paradigm, how many generations do you think that lasts in which the social dislocation that already exists or plagues Black America will not replicate the phenomenon like mass incarceration, like urban crime, like poverty? Do you think that a check of any amount of money escapes those structural defects that exist in these societies? I mean, how do you make that go away?
All good questions.
I'm sorry we got so fired up on it. And I didn't even know we were going to get into this reparations.
I brought it up because I mean,
it's Asia's fault. It's Dr.
Yeah,
Leeds' fault.
sure.
Okay.
Me.
Yeah. Landlords for reparation.
Oh no. I can't even keep up with the comments. I'm not sure if we're supposed to, but
no.
They're going pretty fast.
Yeah, someone said the chat was quiet until ADO. You know what? You know why? Because it's an emotional subject for a lot of people, because a lot of Black people definitely feel wronged.
Yeah.
Right? Something has probably happened in your life.
Yeah.
My life. I can't speak for Pascal. I'm sure some shit happened in his life. And you say, yeah, right on. And when that conversation kind of blew up in 2014, it definitely came and ran a lot of interference to any sort of policy discussion about real redistributive policies.
And I think that's important. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, I think that's an important point that we have to think about people's motivations and the emotions that surround this kind of discourse and plan. Because what I don't want to be is, dehumanize people. I think that we have to discuss where these desires come from. And the reality is, not having access to the things you need, being on the margins of citizenship, that this represents, for some, a pathway to what is due, to be wholly American, wholly, to be a whole citizen. So I think that, we have to give some attention to these desires. And part of the idea of sort of indigenous Blackness that has also emerged as a narrative is another example of, claiming belonging, claiming belonging where that's denied. Where you and your people have been outside of, spaces of belonging for so long. So I think whenever we study, sort of social movements and organizations, et cetera, we think about the motivations. What's the context in which people are thinking these ideas? What's at stake for them? So
what is being misrepresented by the ADOS movement in this conversation? I hate when people say shit like that and they can't say exactly what their grievance is. You can't just sit here and whine and say you're being misrepresented. You have to say exactly what is not factual or where you're being misrepresented or disrespected. Please stop the whining. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Pascal. This is going to get you in trouble. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not. You're a grown man, bro. Do what you got to do.
You can't say, bro. You can't say different strokes for different folks, man. That's some punk shit. You can't come on here talking all that big shit, and then when I ask you to say what happened, where you're aggrieved, then it's different strokes for different folks.
I'm just noticing that why is it always whenever people from ADOS come into a conversation, belligerence comes along right away in terms of the discourse.
Hey, I mean, listen.
Sorry, Mama. I'm sorry.
It is what
This
it
is this is like a consistent theme I've seen with individual actors who claim this movement, is that this is this defensiveness, belligerence, argumentation, attack. Why is that always a consistent, the common consistent pattern here? You have a group of adults having just a basic conversation, and then all of a sudden people are getting riled up. And by the way, what's fascinating, right, is that all three of us have said that we all agree that reparations is a justifiable claim. We simply question the political reality of what happens when someone claims that they've given you reparations, and what exactly are the potentialities of this being a remedy for all of the problems of Black people. So no one has said that Black people shouldn't get reparations.
Hold on, Pascal. I got to interrupt you. Homie said that they didn't have the data until post Bernie.
What are you talking about? People, so they didn't have the data. What does that mean? That we just learned that Black people have much less wealth than white people? That's something we just got yesterday? That's news to people?
I'm trying to practice empathy, and
look, Brother Bilal, I'm sorry. Brother Bilal, I got loud and I was out of line. I apologize. First of all, I apologize. My mom is right. I need to calm down. I'm sorry. My mom said, let's talk about Flint, Michigan. First of all, Mama, it's been 1 hour and 25 minutes. And we told Dr. Leeds that she only had an hour.
Jackson, Mississippi, on the water crisis.
Yes. Yes.
There's a lot at stake. There's a lot happening right now.
There is a lot happening. And so
again, my position is that I actually believe that Joe Biden is going to propose something he's going to call reparations. And what he's going to do, he said, I'm giving you more than anyone's given you in American history. Mm-hmm. And you guys should be thankful you got it. And when you get it, what are you going to say?
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the question I asked when the reparation advocates said, we have an agenda. What happens when the political power that be says, this is what I'm giving you, and they don't give you their whole agenda? What are you going to do? Are you going to take to the streets? Are you going to burn things down? Are you going to revolt against the state? What are you prepared to do?
Well, that was part of a large conversation I was having.
When Biden says this is my plan for reparations, this is what you're going to get. This is the most that anyone has conceded. What exactly are you going to do when he doesn't fulfill what your agenda is?
It's funny you say that. So I was having a conversation earlier today. I think I told you a little bit about this off air, Pascal. I don't know how you feel about this, Dr. Leeds, but there's so much of a conversation about electoral politics. And there were some people that are of the left having a conversation about primarying every establishment Democrat. And I had asked the question, well, then what? There's a lot of energy that goes into primaries. There's a lot of energy that goes into primaries. There's a lot of organizing that has to go into that. Whatever happened to like real movements to push politicians to do anything? The EPA happened under Nixon because there was real movements involved, right? Even the anti-war movement, there was a real movement involved to push politicians. But what if all the movement people are involved in every primary campaign to get 1 or 2 people elected? I mean, how do you feel about that, Pascal?
I mean, again, my that this definitely becomes a product of electoral politics. I there's no question in my mind that one of the reasons why the Democrats were even broaching the conversation about reparations is because they realized they needed to shore up the black vote for the 2020 election, and that this whole posture of racial grievance politics, that as the Democrats, the liberal establishment, whether it's Jamie Dimon or anyone else, or Nancy Pelosi wearing kente cloth, actually care about black people. It's all a political bait and switch to keep black people within the tent of the Democratic Party. And part 2 and make sure that Trump lost the election, and part two, to neutralize any concept of any kind of, collective overall class-based remedy like a federal jobs guarantee, Medicare for all, or anything else from the consciousness of the Black community, and have them focus on saying, I want my check, I want my reparations. Okay, fine. I have no problem with that. What I'm saying is that you might get it. And if you get it and it doesn't change the condition of Black people in America, what happens next? Are you going to say we want a second shot?
Great.
What happens next?
Jean Bajlan wants to hear Professor Leeds say. He's we got to past her bedtime, first of all.
I know. No, what's going on in the comments?
Jean Bajlan wants to get your take, and Mom, I'm trying to get Phoenix to say hi to you or good night to you.
My take on what?
What Pascal just said.
I mean, I don't know. This is a really tough time. And again, I think I see a lot of shortcomings almost heightened by the sort of social mediaification of politics, right? Like I see like, oh, hello. I see, a lot of, I'm just going to say it, Biden and Harris looking like Instagram influencers while people don't have running water or heat in Houston, Texas, and elsewhere. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it becomes this, this almost silencing of any thoughtful, critical thinking about the role of politicians. I mean, that also is a reflective on our society, just obsessed with celebrity culture, that we celebrate things like reaching milestones and having a lot of money, but don't have space to talk about how these don't impact the lives of the majority of people, the masses, that the higher and higher a very small group of Black elites move, the masses of Black people experience marginalized citizenship, deep poverty in the same way. So I think it's a difficult time to be someone to push back on this very problematic two-party system, two corporate parties, that don't present any kind of real options for most Black people. I just find it troubling. I just hate the idea of just shutting down debate in general. I think that's sort of very anti-intellectual, and US people have a problem with anti-intellectualism, I think. Again, social media and how things look, the look of things shapes a lot of that. So I just find it to be a really difficult time. And we push on. We have our grassroots movements that are very important. Mutual aid is more important than ever right now. It's poor people helping other poor people right now to survive the COVID. This is the politics that's keeping people alive, and not the particularly not the elected officials at the highest level. So these are just really interesting times, and all of that context too, and all of this shapes the context out of which you see, renewed claims for reparations, et cetera. So it's a difficult time to, I think, be a Black person, be thinking about what is the relationship to Black people and politics in this country. What's the relationship between Black people and electoral politics? It's a tough time.
Well, I mean, one of the things, and this might surprise people, one of the things that I give the ADOS individuals credit for is that they've complicated the narrative of Black fealty to the Democratic Party, and they've at least created a discussion as to why exactly Black politics doesn't work for Black people, which I think, I've said this before, I think that was a valuable contribution on their part. It's something that we at Black Agenda Report have been doing for over a decade, but I still think it's definitely a valid contribution. My position is that, okay, you've made that critique, and it's a totally justifiable critique. But again, you are making a demand on an existing political system within a capitalist society. Okay, you're going to make a demand. The ruling class is going to come down with their counter argument to their demand. Their counter argument is going to be less than what you demand. Okay. Now, Bilal is saying it's not going to be a check. It's going to be a complete class-based initiative with policies. We've already seen that the American political establishment is not interested in implementing class-based solutions for the majority of people, even white people. So now we're saying that reparations has to be a check and class-based solutions. So again, how do you create a politics that you make this a reality?
Well, let me ask this question. This is where I start to get frustrated with the discussion. Is a $15 an hour minimum wage would lift, what is it, 30-some million Americans right now out of poverty conditions,
disproportionately Black women.
So why is that more important, or that's just not part of the discussion? That's where I'm kind of. And not after his article either. The talk about reparations didn't heat up.
Nobody in ADOS was talking about reparations before Ta-Nehisi Coates. You had Nkobe and other people. His articles what sparked the whole thing. I knew the individuals who started the whole movement of ADOS, and they were not talking about reparations before the article. That's a lie.
Reparations came on the scene right when there was a huge push, I feel, with Bernie Sanders.
Well, it became when Sanders didn't co-sign reparations. That's when it took on a whole life of its own.
Yeah,
the discourse around it enters the popular thoroughfare with the piece written by Coates.
And when you think about things like the $15 an hour minimum wage, and
by the way, we're not denying that Nkobe had been working on this before. There are other organizations that have been working on reparations. We get it, but in terms of the popular Twitter sphere and all of these movements and everyone claiming "quote unquote" reparations, it all starts after that article.
And it's almost, I find it a little insulting to not even be like all up on this minimum wage hike. And $15, we all agree. I think everybody agrees that that's still not enough to where we need to be. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I just honestly, the fact that we're talking about $15. I mean, wow, this is just what a reality that we live in. It blows my mind, particularly when we think about the impact of COVID. I just feel like what a dehumanizing country. And back to your point, Pascal, is how can you trust such a machine to dole out or determine anything that's going to support your liberation? How can you trust it? It's just the machine is so anti-human. Like they were talking about
a machine that's done nothing, and they only pay. And let's keep in mind, and I don't know how much these reparations scholars actually follow Black people that actually have gotten some money over past tragedies. And I believe in Jacksonville, Florida, there were a few people that got paid out a little bit of money for a horrible travesty that happened there that John Singleton based a movie on.
That's in Rosewood.
Yeah, I think they got a little bit of money. Jean Bajlan says, why does Professor Leeds think that Sanders failed to win popular support among Black America?
I want to ask Bilal something simple question. Is there any example of reparations being given to any constituency in the United States or the world that completely lifted them out of poverty? Is there a single example, or transformed their whole economic reality? Anyone, Native Americans, Jews, anyone?
And just to that question about Bernie Sanders, I mean, I don't know. I think there are a number of things there, but I think there seems to be like and I'm no scholar of U.S. electoral politics, but I think there, was a machine, and there's a lot of misinformation that seemed to shape how this all went down. And of course, anytime someone's talking about redistributing wealth even a little bit, we know how the pushback looks. I think, you know, obviously Biden was the corporate choice. And so here we are. And a lot of us are being told to be silent and just be happy that there's a Black woman who's a vice president and to celebrate, yay, HBCU, AKA, and that should be the end. Give them time to do what they're going to do. But I find the whole conversation to be very problematic. I feel like we tend to have very limited political imaginations in this country. Obviously, this is the product of the Cold War. Cold War repression, I want to be very clear. So, you know, it's, yeah, we're left with two corporate parties that put profit over people, as we know.
So he's saying, first of all, no one's talking about a check, Bilal Shabazz. I think what Pascal keeps trying to say is whatever you get, it's not going to be enough. Then what? And he's also saying of all the things this government has done in its history when it comes to any sort of reparations with natives, the Chinese, the Japanese, some Black people, has it ever lifted everyone out of some sort of impoverished situation? So we're not talking about a check. What are you talking about that's so different from a program that would help more people? And why do you think that the country as a whole would sign on to whatever the reparations bill is at the end of the day? Again, this is the same country that can't even agree to have temporary Medicare for all during a pandemic, but all of a sudden it can agree in unison to just give Negroes whatever the hell they want. Land, payments over time, free college, trips to the Bahamas every Thursday, whatever the fuck it is you want. Why the hell do you think you're going to get it? That's my question. First and foremost.
My position is that even I'm actually willing to say you might get it.
Hold up, Dusty said, didn't lift any Holocaust survivors out of poverty. Didn't they get some reparations, actually? Some form of reparations?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, my position is that I actually will make the argument that I think that I'm not even so worried about not getting the reparations, right? I'm actually more worried about what happens when they give you something that they believe is reparations, and then they tell you we've given you more than anyone else, and it's done, and then all of the actual blowback from getting just that, which won't be enough, starts happening. Mm-hmm. Are people old enough to remember the blowback that came about with affirmative action? Do you not think that there will be? There will not be blowback from?
We're still dealing with that blowback.
Do you not think that there will be blowback from the even limited concept of reparations that the ruling class may concede? I mean, what exactly happens then? Well, I mean, my point is that I'm actually willing to say, yeah, I think that it will give you reparations. I actually think that what you will get, though, is something that will be profoundly deficient. You'll be made to believe that it is the best that you can get, that no one's gotten you more. And then the question will become, when the blowback begins after that, and perhaps other rights that you've traditionally had become whittled away, what happens then?
Somebody said, remember Reconstruction.
And you know, the hilarity of the moment as the people are actually trying to call this the third Reconstruction. I was like, do y'all remember how the first two went and you want a third one?
I mean, look, I understand it's a fight, but my question to the people that are so down for this fight, we can help out more of our own with getting a $15 minimum wage that everybody thought was going to be so easy. When that whole forced to vote BS was taking over the internet, that was one of the things I heard a very well-to-do Black left tuber say is, oh, Biden already said he's going to give everybody $15 minimum wage. So I don't even know why AOC is talking about that. And here we are. no $15.
I mean, the thing is, if someone asks, well, you know, the same chances we have of having reparations fixed is the same chances we have of ending capitalism in America. But what we do have in American history is the collapse of capitalism having in America and the restructuring of capitalism to become more economically redistributive through the New Deal becoming a reality. So what I'm saying is that, you know, perhaps if you want to call me Pollyannish for thinking I could work to end capitalism, what I do know is that there was a period of time in America, particularly in the 20s and 30s, where people who were fighting capitalism got this country to make a massive amelioration and change into the system that lifted significant numbers of majority whites, though, unfortunately, out of poverty. So the capacity and the nature of capitalism, which causes it to basically eventually boom, bust, and fail, will very possibly create a reality in which they will have to make a structural adjustment. And if we are in that time right now, I think that what should be demanded, if you ask me what my suggestion is that there should be a demand for a universal programmatic change of policies to include wealth distribution, but because there is such a historical disadvantage given to African Americans, that they should ask for a special dispensation, meaning that let's say that we have some kind of new deal that comes to America. I believe that people who would be negotiating on the behalf of the Black American community should say, so listen, you know, we have been disproportionately left out of this economy. So when the federal jobs guarantee comes in, we need to make sure that a slightly larger percentage of our community gets jobs that are in, you know, XYZ more beneficial positions, because we have been historically left out of these programs. And you negotiate around the class-based remedies in a way that tries to compensate for the way you have been alienated or left out of economic programs in the past. I think that's logical. Again, I'm not saying that you won't get the reparations. What I'm saying is that when you allow Black politics to be the negotiator in terms of how the ruling class will distribute remedies, they will normally give you remedies that will work for a small class of the Black community and will not be trickled down to the largest segment of the Black community. There's a good book I'm reading now by Preston Smith that talks about the difference between racial democracy and social democracy. And he looks at the history of the civil rights movement, and he demonstrates that whenever Black folk asked for racial democracy or race-based programs, they got programs that catered particularly to the Black middle class and that were not redistributive to the Black poor and working class. Whenever Black folk asked for socially democratic policy and programs, they got class-wide programs that had a more distributive benefit for the majority of Black people. And what I'm saying is that the problem I see with reparations is it's falling into the same trap of that racial democracy. You're asking for a race-based remedy that the ruling class may actually give you, but they're going to tailor it in a way that's not going to be a class comprehensive remedy for the large majority of Black people who are poor and working class. As my brother Anthony Ware says, it's going to be a wealth transfer to the Black political class and the Black middle class.
Well, that being said, we kept Dr. Leeds on for an extra 47 minutes. So,
Dr. Leeds, I really appreciate you staying with us and being so kind and with your time and maintaining patience and wonderful demeanor throughout this whole interview. We would love to have you back at some point again. If you ever publish a book or even to talk about other things. I know we kind of strayed from the initial topic, but it was a pleasure definitely for us here at This Is Revolution, and hopefully you would join us again.
Thank you for having me. There were twists and turns in the conversation.
Well, I hope you enjoyed being on
by me, but I definitely enjoyed the conversation, and maybe next time, we can get a little bit more into, thinking about the African diaspora, etc., some connections across the Americas, those kinds of things, what's going on the ground with Black social movements in Latin America, those kinds of things.
Did you ever read the book Homegoing? It's a historical fiction book that came out like 4 years ago. Do you know the book, Pascal?
No,
it actually tells the story of 8 generations, 10 generations of Black people, starting with the slave trade, and it starts with 2 half sisters. One is stays back in the Ivory Coast, and the other gets sold off into slavery. You guys know that?
I know the title, but I haven't read it. Do you recommend it?
it's definitely a tear-filled read. I'm surprised Oprah hasn't made a movie off of it yet. I teared up a lot. It's got a lot. It's filled with a lot of, I don't want to say tropes, but.
By the way, someone asked for the book by Preston Smith. It's Racial Democracy in the Black Metropolis by Preston H. Smith II.
He'll be on next Thursday.
Yes, good book.
Smith will be here. So we want to get you back, Dr. Leeds.
Yes, this has been phenomenal. I hope you enjoyed being on with us.
Yeah, no, it was great. It's a little late on this side, so I hope I made some sense, but I enjoyed the conversation.
Maybe you can come back on we do Saturday at 12 o'clock your time. And that's even more insane because there's more of us on air. There's a third co-host on Saturdays.
Okay.
She is I put a link up to your work actually in the description. Dr. Asia Leeds is a professor of African Diaspora Studies at the University of Spelman in Atlanta.
Spelman College.
Sorry.
Yes, I am.
As Black people. This whole show should be called Particular Ass Black People.
You got it wrong. Anyway, in particular, you got it wrong. University in Spelman. It's Spelman College. What are you talking about?
I mean, come on. Well, thank you so much. Very interesting. Maybe I can look back over the comments afterward. I don't know how this works. I haven't.
Yeah, it's on. It'll be up on YouTube. I'll send you a link in your email to the show.
Awesome.
And you can share it on your social media. I've been retweeting your social media as much as possible. So.
Yes. Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Bye.
She was awesome.
That was fun. So we got a little too heated and the show went way too long because I'm supposed to give this show to Zero Books and we want to keep it at an hour and we went over the hour. So that means that we have to cut whoever our Thursday guest off is at 45 minutes.
Everybody seems to have liked Dr. Leeds.
She, very, very, very sweet woman. So $15 is good. So we all agreed that we're all going to force the vote for 15. If we want to force a vote for anything, be like $15 an hour minimum wage. My mom has been a staunch supporter of the $15 an hour minimum wage for the last 10 years. To give you an idea of how played out that number is, she's been fighting for that for 10 fucking years. And like I said, Bilal Shabazz, I apologize for being loud, mouthing off. I apologize. So if I'm going to meet you in real life because Corona will be over and I'll be traveling the world again and we will meet. And I'm trying to be nice to everybody.
You guys went way off topic. Ha ha, he's laughing.
Jean Bajlan, you know we go off topic, you motherfucker.
She's the one who brought up the subject matter.
She brought that shit up. And then on the chat, someone mentioned, I don't know how forced the vote came up, but on the chat, that shit came up. So now they're talking about how expensive Preston Smith's book is.
I don't know why I didn't get it. Was not expensive. It was not that expensive for me. Try another website.
I'm thinking about doing this, and I want to ask the chat this, and I want to ask Pascal this. I was thinking about trying to get Dr. Bear back on for Thursday so we can finish asking him those questions that we had from initially.
I gotta find them.
I mean, there's always questions we can ask Dr. Bear. He could do a fucking seminar on the intro to Marxism. He can do a lot. He's actually doing a lot of shit on China right now. But
there's some really interesting news that we should talk about on the domestic and foreign policy tip. We got Biden giving sanctions to Russia over the Navalny thing.
We did a whole Navalny show with Koob.
We did a whole Navalny show with Koob. Mm-hmm. We don't want to talk about Neera Tanden not being promoted to OMG, the Office of Management and Budget.
That's some mildly good news. So I'm getting people saying Dr. Bear is good. If I get 2 more people that says Dr. Bear is good, then we'll get Dr. Bear. I'll hit him up. I'll hit up Dr. Bear. I actually talked to him not too long ago. Night.
Someone said, please forget Nira. Don't talk about Nira.
Yeah, Nira Tan is no good. Pascal and I, we always, I forget to sometimes shout this out. Every Tuesday morning now, Pascal, or morning for me, Pascal and I do about 2, sometimes 3 hours with Marcus from the Left Flank Vets.
Yeah, this is our second podcast appearance for the day. We had
we talked a lot more about actually Black politics with Marcus. I hit him up earlier in the morning and said I had an idea to something to talk about because of something I had heard on a leftist podcast show. Marion Barry's name had came up, and these people's Marion Barry discussion, I thought, just kind of missed the point on who the fuck Marion Barry was and even how Black politics works, and it kind of ended up irritating me. So I wanted to kind of delve deep into how Black politics, as Pascal always says, is the politics of containment. So we talked about who's the guy that just died today? Vernon Jordan.
Vernon Jordan.
Talked a little bit about Vernon Jordan. We definitely talked about Marion Barry. We talked about all that kind of first wave of Black mayors that come off the tail end of the civil rights movement. We talk about a lot of these Black civil rights leaders that also come from some of the Panther Party and the Civil Rights Party that are part of the tough on crime rhetoric that you get in the mid 80s, and also these tough on crime bills that you get in the mid and late 80s that lead us to the 94 crime bill, which starts to build out prisons, because if anyone remembers that era, the conversation was the filling of the prisons, right? They were too overcrowded, and that was the problem. So because we were filling them with these ridiculous drug charges. So we talked about that for like 2 or 3 hours.
The name of the Preston Smith book is Racial Democracy in the Black Metropolis.
And if I could screenshot Kuba, Jean Bajlan, and Pascal's Facebook conversation thread, it's amazing. I was telling to somebody else, I was like, I learned more in this Facebook thread than half of the books I've read.
Yeah, we were having a good conversation about the international elite and foreign policy and and their perception of globalism versus nationalism. We've had some. Listen, when we had the conversation we had with Kuba and Jean and Maria, that foreign policy conversation was very good. It was awesome. That's probably one of the best I've seen in the YouTube spaces. If you guys didn't see the foreign policy conversation we had with Kuba, whose last name I cannot pronounce, Jean Bajlan, and with Maria, whose last name I can't pronounce.
Kova.
Yes, check it out. It was a pretty in-depth discussion about foreign policy that I think is better than you're going to get in a lot of places, in a lot of media spaces.
And also Jean, Kuba, and Maria are going to be coming on the show. I think we talked about every other week.
Oh, really? That's we're going to try to get them on every week.
Well, they're getting ready to get their own thing. So I was like, well, you can use us as a good launching point, and we'll share resources as far as guests and stuff like that. And they actually make for great content. I think their deep dives into the inner workings of empire, the inner workings of the military industrial complex. My mom wants us to get Brianna Joy Gray. So, Mama, we're just not big enough for her to care. Wish, but yeah, not gonna happen. Not today. So yeah, did you want to say anything before I head off, Pascal?
No, we went over time, and
and I have to reread this book because I'm actually talking to this man tomorrow morning. So for those of you that don't know, this isn't just a live stream thing. There's also an audio podcast, and not lately. A lot of the audio podcast has been a lot of these shows that I dump the audio to, but I often interview people, and I'll be interviewing Dr. Andres Mom. He wrote this really good book last year on Verso called Corona, Climate, and Chronic Emergency, War, Communism in the 21st Century, where he basically talks about COVID and how it's kind of here to stay, and capitalism's role in COVID. Less the environment, more capitalism's role involved in COVID. And his solutions, which are kind of, even admits it, they're kind of dream solutions on how to handle COVID. He calls it his Leninist solution to fix COVID, which is kind of funny. Jason, if I have to cause more Twitter drama, you know why, Joanna? We can't cause Twitter. First of all, Pascal isn't on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter. I just don't use it regularly. I
don't know how to be mean to people that I don't really know that well on social media, because it just seems silly to me. Like if I see somebody say something dumb, or I can't, I don't know. I feel like there's people that know how to call out politicians in 140 characters funnier than I can. So I don't know. Pascal does never post on Twitter. He never posts.
I just retweet the stuff that comes from this link.
That's all he does.
Twitter
Pascal
is
level up his hat game. He says Pascal can't wear hats anymore. His head's too large.
My head's too big.
All the thoughts.
Gene wants me to come talk to his class about the Haitian Revolution next time he teaches world history. I could do that. That would be fun. Miss LME says Pascal is smart. I appreciate the compliment. You're smart too. All of our viewers are smart. We're all smart here.
I learned stuff from the chat. I'm not gonna lie. I learned stuff from the chat. I'm hella not gonna lie. All you wear is dad hats. I don't know. I am a dad, and this is my dad hat. I feel like every hat I wear is a dad hat because I'm a dad, and there's like nothing I'm going to do.
Pamela Davis says Pascal is too smart. Well, that's not a compliment, Pamela Davis. I thought you liked me.
Pamela Davis is sass personified. I got to, and keep in mind, I got to go deal with this sass. So when you guys hear me on this show, I have to go deal with this sass first thing in the morning with Pamela Davis. I try to run out of there. So now you know, Mama, why I run out of there, because it's just too much sass. Can't handle it. So much fear of a black hat going on.
Brother, listen, we got to go, man. We can't keep this going too long.
I gotta go read Hop on Pop for the 100th time to my son. So real quick, apparently Dr. Seuss is banned.
Dr. Seuss is banned?
Yeah, they banned a couple Dr. Seuss books. Does people in the chat know about they banning Dr. Seuss books?
No. Why are they banning Dr. Seuss books?
Something he said was racist about black people.
Really?
Something he said was racist apparently, and people got mad about a picture. I don't know what it was, but I'm definitely about to go in there and I'm about to read Hop on Pop, because I looked through it after I saw that to see if I was reading something I wasn't supposed to.
Who did the canceling?
Oh, he did a lot of anti-Asian propaganda during World War II. Oh, well, there's no Asians in the one. My son's Asian. Does that count for anything? He's Asian-ish. No, I don't know anything about.
A lot of anti-Japanese propaganda in World War II. Yeah, but I mean, Warner Brothers cartoons were racist in that era too. I mean, there's a lot of,
I thought Dr. Seuss was anti-Nazi. Yeah, he also did anti-Nazi propaganda. That's what I thought. I didn't know anything about anti-Asian propaganda. Which book is it that's supposed to be? I forgot which book it was. Apparently, it's not the books that my son has. He has like a handful. Hopefully, it's not one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Someone says cancel it all. I don't know, but like I said, I got to go in there and read Dr. Seuss, and I'm going to read the Star Wars book to him again, even though he doesn't listen to me when I read it. Little bastard. So on our way out, I'm going to play this clip that Pascal told us to play, which originally common redfish equals common fish. There's a crow cartoon he has. I don't know about that. My little brother grew up with this Disney sing-along thing. I don't know if you remember the song, the movie The Song of the South. Pascal, do you remember the Disney? So Disney actually doesn't play that anymore. And hopefully my brother's watching, because you might be able to make some money off this video if you still have it. He used to have this video and it had Song of the South. It was all the songs from Song of the South. And he would play all the time, zippity doo dah, and all the
Yeah, I remember they had the big Sambo-esque black character in that Song of the South.
Oh, super Sambo. Like there was no hiding of the Sambo.
Yeah.
It was hella Sambo-ish. So what's funny is I thought this conversation we were going to have was going to be more in line with the clip we played with the African American thing. I won't tell you what Teray told me about African American. That was pretty funny. Which I think this conversation is interesting because I vaguely remember the conversation about what we were going to be called, right? We weren't going to be Afro-American. We were going to be African American. Yes, Disney read along. Oh, you guys remember that shit? That is awesome. Now I don't feel old. And Pascal, you know this guy right here?
No, don't know him. Is he a brother of yours?
No, this is your second cousin.
Wall Street Journal writer, probably conservative.
Oh, yeah, look at that. Look at that hairline. Anyone with a Supercuts hairline like that has never been to a black barbershop.
Got a fade without the F.
All right.
Mr. Llewellyn, you prefer the term American.
Well, I guess in all of my years on this earth, I've been called about 5 or 6 different things. I've been called.
I do want to add this into this clip. I was on a panel not too long ago, and we were having a discussion about black people never owning the means of production or anything. This dude literally was one of the biggest Coca-Cola bottling factories. So there you go. There you go. Black people owning the means, literally the means of production.
Black. I've been called Afro-American. Now we're talking about African American. I've been called Negro. I've been called colored. And what strikes me as a continuous theme or theorem in all of this is the fact that we never have been called full citizens of the United States of America. And what I'd like to see accomplished once and for all is that we are considered as full citizens and have all the rights and privileges there too. All I see is that people in Russia, people in Poland, people in Nicaragua are all packing their bags and heading for the United States of America, feeling it's some kind of panacea or a great place to be. And there must be something here that brings all these people. All I'm saying to you is that I think it's a disgrace that we have been here for well over 200 years.
Do we lose audio? I can't hear anything. I think we lost audio. Man, you see, it's the deep state, man. The feds came for us, man. They can't hear you, Jason, but they can hear me.
Now? Can you hear me now?
I hear you now, yes.
Okay, hold on.
Jason, you had to do something.
I did have to do, again, it's this shitty interface that I have to use right now. It's really frustrating. It's like the most frustrating shit ever. Can you hear me better?
We can hear you now, brother.
This is super frustrating. Jason's talking to himself now. Share audio. That's whack.
It was the deep state. That's what it was.
You can hear me though?
We can hear you.
Michael Dukakis as being a Greek American. Well, Greek American pinpoints a country called Greece. African American does not pinpoint any country. It is a continent. And therefore, either you're going to play a game called European American or African American, or otherwise, again, we still haven't been able to refine ourselves down to where we come from, whether we come from Nigeria or Kenya.
All right, well, let me just go to Mr. Toure here. In the 1960s, as I said before, you were one of the ardent proponents of using the term black. How do you feel now about abandoning it in favor of African American?
Well, I do not even use the term African American. I use the term Africans because that's what we are. We're Africans in America. There's nothing American about us. Our history has only been a history of struggle in America. We are the only ethnic group in America who have to shed our blood to make reform. To get the vote, we must shed our blood. To get our children to school, we must shed our blood. To get on a bus and sit where we want, we must shed our blood. To even get in a filthy 5 and 10 cent store, we must shed our blood. So I don't see how we could be American. We're Africans in America struggling against American capitalism. And only until it's destroyed will we enjoy the rights that everyone else is speaking of.
Well, how do you respond to that, Mr. Llewellyn?
Well, what he's trying to do is to change the name of the game or change the rules. And I haven't got time to change the rules. I've got to look at what is. I guess I'm more practical about this. Maybe the ideal panacea is to change the rules and make it all a kind of a equal socialistic state. But in the meantime, let's talk about what is. This is a capitalistic society. We are here. We are paying our taxes. We are doing work each and every day. And I think we have the right to participate. We have sent people to war since the revolutionary times and spilled our blood for America, from Crispus Attucks and the Revolutionary War all the way down through this Vietnam. So therefore, I want to get what you can construe as my piece of the action like everybody else has gotten. And it really annoys me to see people who haven't made this kind of contribution over the years come here and feel that they can claim it and get it. And we have done that.
You have a response to that?
Of course. In the first place, just because we're in just because we're in the capitalist system doesn't mean we must love it. We were made slaves. It doesn't mean that while you're a slave, you must love slavery. A conscious slave, while picking cotton on the plantation, is thinking about how to escape, how to bring freedom. Therefore, just because we're in capitalism doesn't mean we must enjoy it. We have to fight for an equal society. That's our history. Our people show that we spill blood instinctively to advance humanity. And we have this responsibility to advance America, yes, to a socialist state.
You would seem to imply from your comment that capitalism is utterly inconsistent with Africa and Africans.
It is.
But I would posit that that's not true. If you look again at the nations of Africa, if you look at African people in every country of the world, especially in recent times, they essentially want things. They want products. They want the things that it's, at least up to this point, demonstrated that only capitalism, with its imperfections and with its inequities, which hopefully some people believe can still be tamed, people want things. And I don't somehow see a worldwide Pan-Africanism as also spelling the death knell for capitalism at the same time. It seems inconsistent. There are too many people who want cars in Lagos, Nigeria, last time I checked. The traffic jams are horrendous.
I don't think we can solve that one right now, but let me just go back to Ramona Edlin, because both Mr. Winter and Mr. Llewellyn talked about how they don't think it's possible to leapfrog over a lot of history and go back. It's impossible to go back to the agrarian life, that you can't even pinpoint a place in Africa where black people come from, if I'm paraphrasing your comments correctly. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, our culture and heritage in Africa entail far more than agrarian economies. Mathematics and science were born in Africa, philosophy and religion. And as well as that, we've been accomplished musicians and dancers for centuries. cities. There's so much in our cultural heritage that we need to recoup right now, particularly for the children. And it is possible to leapfrog, as they put it. As a matter of fact, it's not only possible, it's necessary. Because if you begin with slavery, then you will still have children looking in your eyes as they do in mine, in our cities and in the streets, and saying, what difference does it really make to you?
I'm going to ask this question before I leave you alone, Pascal, and I'll ask this to the chat too. I know I need to leave all you people alone. Do you miss this kind of programming to a certain degree?
I miss this caliber of intellectual rigor. I mean, I think that this is like the McNeil NewsHour. It's not a Black Affairs show, but Charlene Hunter Galt, I mean, she's a long-term, very, very esteemed Black journalist. Mm-hmm. But I think that I'll tell you what I mean. Mm-hmm. I miss the time in which people could talk about Black affairs in a serious fashion, instead of everything being reduced to some kind of pop culture or hip hop trope.
Yeah, someone said they used to like Love Like It Is with Gil Noble.
Gil Noble was serious. I grew up watching Gil Noble.
So, I don't know, there's something about this era of conversation, even though, I may not agree with everybody on the panel. I agree with your point that it was definitely just taking Black politics just seriously. This is a serious discussion.
Yeah, the conversation was held at a much more serious level. And I just think that from the rise of the millennial, man, everything really became reduced to just like some kind of pop culture trope. And it's I don't even think it's only Black political discourse. I think American social and political discourse, like when you come to the point where you have like, these nightly news shows, these comedy shows that cover politics, right? Like what's my man?
John Oliver.
John Oliver and whatnot. Like, it's a rather it diminishes the seriousness of the discourse, and it's a consequence of where we are in terms of American media.
Jocelyn Sanchez, I agree with you. It is. It's hot takes. I need to have the hot take. I need to have the retweet. Before there was a retweet, you said shit in a room with motherfuckers, and that was it.
The rise of the soundbite.
Yes, I agree. Politics is sports. That's where we are. Politics is sports. Side note, I was actually on a good leftist sports show the other day, and I'm thinking about trying to have them come on and we could talk about the neoliberalization of youth sports.
It's a good subject.
And then talking about how the discourse around sports unions affects the discourse around actual unions, since that's, we hear more about sports unions than we do about the IWW. Dick Cavett, yeah. Definitely. The Dick Cavett on YouTube, watching some of those
conversations. Gene Bajlan says politics is literally comedy in America.
And isn't that the sad part? Who was that we had on the show talking about? It was Ben Burgess, when I had Ben Burgess on an audio only podcast, him talking about that movement that Jon Stewart had, and like that's a problem. He's like, when Jon Stewart is your political education, or even John Oliver. I have a lot of problems with John Oliver. People have to keep in mind.
Or what's the South African guy?
Light-skinned fella. Lighterson.
Trevor Noah.
There you go. I was close. But like John Oliver talking about Brazil on his show totally missed the mark on Brazil. It almost sounded like he just Wikipedia'd Brazil, and even Lula for that matter. It was disrespectful. His talk about Brazil. And if you're getting your politics from Bill Maher, John Oliver, and whoever else in the late night comedy sphere, then you're going to have some problematic ass politics. Venezuela as well. Totally missed the mark on Venezuela. Was extremely disrespectful in that Venezuela show that he had. So,
well, so much of media is about reinforcing empire anyway. So,
well, these are supposed to be the guys that tell you like the truth like it is in 15 minutes.
They have commercial donors. They have they have to be financed and funded.
Phoenix is still waiting. My mom is right, and the longer I wait, the more frustrated he gets. And
you want to call it a wrap?
I'm gonna have to call it a wrap because I have some daddying to do. Thank you guys. This was a lot of fun.
Dr. Leeds was awesome.
Dr. Leeds, thank you for coming on and staying literally in almost an hour, but 50 minutes longer than we said we were going to have you on. Doug is not going to get this stream, Josh, because I can't give him a 2-hour show. So we got to get a good 45 to an hour in for Thursday. So it is what it is. It is what it is. We will do it again. We're going to do it again tomorrow or Thursday. I have to do it again tomorrow with Andres Malm. Really good book, guys, actually, by the way. If you really want a good take on why zoonotic viruses are going to be with us for some time. This is a good book, as is Ecology and Fear by Mike Davis also. So Thursday, we're going to try to get Dr. Asatar Bear.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. You got some questions that you're going to, new questions for him?
I'll try to find the old ones.
If you guys have any questions that you want to give to Dr. Bear, feel free. My Twitter inbox is open, so please inbox me on Twitter. I do return the messages. I'm not a douche. Find me on Facebook. I'm just regular ass Jason Miles. Find me before they ban me again. And you can hit us with the email booking at thisisrevolutionpodcast.com if you have any questions or anything you want to talk to Dr. Bear about. I just want to get your guys' take on it now. Pascal is going to give me a very thick list of complex questions to give to Dr. Bear.
I'll try to find the ones I already used.
So but he called me last week and we talked for a little bit, and I called him Dr. Bear. As we're talking, he goes, Jason, just call me Asatar, man. If I don't follow you, I don't, just inbox me, because I'd be scared to follow certain people because I'm like, man, because sometimes I'll follow somebody and then I get a message to send them some money to an African nation. I'm like, oh, you got me. That's why Pascal don't follow nobody.
I follow people, man. All right, listen, man. On that note, I got to wrap. I'm about to bounce.
He's tired. We wore him out from early this morning because he was on fire this morning. Go back and watch Left Flank Vets on Twitch. Pascal was on fire this morning. All right. Peace, y'all.
Peace.
You, to me, or to anyone else, whether I live or die, whether I take drugs, whether I kill another person, whether I learn anything in school, we have a responsibility. And I think that one way we can have a cultural renaissance is to identify with a land base that gave us the wonderful things about our nature and our culture.
Mr. Llewellyn?
Well, that all sounds very nice and wonderful, but I invite you to take a look at Africa right now and today and look at the situation in Eritrea against Ethiopia and all the other things that have happened, Biafra with the Nigerians and what have you. That, in my opinion, is idealistic and not the gut of the problem. The gut of the problem is something called values. The gut of the problem is something called family. The gut of the problem is something called importance. What do we construe and believe to be important?
I would submit that without a cultural offensive, without our unifying at this particular time and saying what we believe in and who we are and how we will train our children and what our families mean to us, that we will continue to have those same gut issues. That's precisely the point. We will continue unless we develop a cultural vehicle which will move us forward. All groups move forward by strength of their culture. It is a myth that individuals move forward. And certainly we cannot accept 2 or 3 of our...
Side note, Joanna, you are a damn fool. I just saw your tweet about Dr. Leeds seeing Jessica Krug's name. Damn fool. That shit's hilarious.
Group emerging year after year while the vast masses of us continue to go down. We have a responsibility.
Let me raise a point back to you, Kwame Ture. When you launched this move that resulted in black being adopted as the defining symbol for African American people, many people felt that it helped to purge them of all the negative feelings about themselves, that it really represented the first major psychological break. And you heard the woman in the tape talk about black is beautiful. I mean, that was the most positive affirmation of blackness by black people. What do you say to people now who say you simply cannot abandon the term that came to symbolize so much for black people?
Human progress does not stand still. It moves. We came here as Africans. One of the first organizations we had fighting for us is known as the Free African Society. The very first independent organization we had in this country was the church. It was known as the African Methodist Episcopalian Church. So from Africans, our oppressor has changed us to colored, to Negro, to this, to that. We understand it's a step. Coming to black had a powerful point, because the point was that we were oppressed because of this color of our skin, and this was racism. But this fight is not just a fight over the color of our skin. A fight for power is a fight for land. When Mr. Llewellyn speaks about power, he's talking about land. Our land is Africa. America is not our land. It belongs to the American Indians, and we have a right to stand and take a moral struggle with them. And we don't worry about people being for things. People want things is incorrect. The point is not to explain the world. The point is to change it. If the people want material things, then we have a responsibility to tell them that things more important than material things, like freedom.
Mr. Winter?
Well, I can't claim to have been there, indeed, when black was coined, because I was somewhat in high school, and I was on the listening end as, indeed, you were doing the talking. But it's always been my feeling that black was more than the recognition of where our blood comes from. It has a lot to do with the experience of people of color in a larger sense under colonialism, whether it was external colonialism, let's say in the Caribbean, or the internal colonialism that we had to deal with here in the United States, rather than simply a statement of Africa. Because the fact is, we have become more than simply descendants of Africa. We have created a lot of what America is in our own image. When you talk about this cultural-based offensive, I would rather see us claim American culture, which is not European culture. America does not mean white. American doesn't mean white. It means a combination of European and African and Asian and the rest of the cultures of the whole world. This is what America is. And if it denies the fact of what is African within it, then it's up to us to continue to assert that no, America does not mean white. America means a melting and a combination of things.
I think that's the point. We are saying African and American, and not everyone is willing to say American, and not everyone is willing to say African, but the point is we are trying to merge the two, and American society at this point in time does exclude the African reality. America is an African as well as a European invention. Well, we know that, but it isn't accepted widely as now.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Eland. What is wrong? Hakeem Madabuti said a few moments ago that in his writing and everything, he's going to use both. I mean, is there a problem with using African American for those who choose to, and for those who choose to use black, to use black?
No, I think we all will use both to a certain extent. First of all, it's going to be hard to break old habits that were very dear to us, and I certainly was along with Stokely in the days when the name was changed. But it is important to continue to draw the consciousness of our
Did
people.
you peep? She
to a
called
set of
him
values
Stokely.
which were positive and
Like she
productive for
pulled
us.
the
To
whole
call our
mama called him
mother's
Clay,
name,
I'ma
our
call him
mother's name is
Clay.
Africa.
Dang.
We are children without her if we leave that out, and I think that it's fair to say no one of us is satisfied with the status quo today.
Well, it seems that Time Magazine, in fact, has a piece on this week, and it says that for more than a century, descendants of freedmen have debated what name they should bear as a people, and in every instance, the shift in the change of appellation coincided with a new phase in the struggle for equality. Is that what's going on now, in your view, and what stage is this?
Yes, and I think this is a point of evolution in our culture, and it's the stage right before we cross the threshold to the 21st century. I think we are saying that there's a quickening of our will. We will not cross the threshold of the 21st century in the condition that we are today.
All right, let me ask Mr. Winter, what do you think about that?
I don't necessarily see this as a quickening, if you will, in that kind of direction. It seems to me that a move like this is an attempt more at a rhetorical assertion to sort of put a new name on things, but I don't see where it quite takes us to getting a better handle on what is immediately in front of us.
Maybe I should say, Charlene, that the cultural offensive is going to entail agenda setting, goal setting, working together to achieve our purposes. As you well know, Charlene, in the movement years, when you decided to desegregate the University of Georgia along with Ham, we were unified around your decision. We were purposeful. We were powerful. There was a sense of destiny, and we achieved our goals. What we are so sadly lacking now is any sense of purpose or destiny. We are not setting agendas. We are not working together, though we're working very hard.
But is that because we don't have the right name?
Well, the name change is the first step in what we hope will be a self-conscious examination of our culture, going back to our ancient as well as our contemporary strengths, and pulling together a vehicle which will be more useful to us than the one that we are now engaged in. If anyone is satisfied with the status quo, I'm not aware of it, particularly our children.
Mr. Llewellyn, just very briefly, do you see this as a critical stage in the evolution of...
I swear, I do not know why people keep talking about what the container is called. It's what's the content of the container. This won't get us into the 21st century unless our kids can read, write, compute, and be able to compete in this country to make a living and to make progress. If that doesn't take place, we can put African American on them, we can put Negro on them, we can put anything you want to put on them, but they're not going to play the game in the 21st century because the field is getting tougher and tougher, and this not a level field.
I wonder what that guy thinks
Let me just
now.
we're about to run out of time. Mr. Toure, a final comment on that point.
The era of the thinking here is that most people think that Africans in America came here just like other immigrant groups did. All other immigrants came to America expecting a better way of life. We started in hell, which was a slave ship, and we're still in hell. This incorrect assumption makes it appear as if we've made a contribution with our
That
culture.
black guy next
Our
to you
culture
is
has been
totally
trampled
not in
upon,
hell.
not the others. Any contribution we've made to America is the test of the strength of our culture in spite of this oppression. We are Africans, and that's exactly where we're going.
Is the term, in your view, is that where you end it? Is that where it stops?
The content was African. The label has been changed to confuse us. If we came here as Africans, how do we end up as Americans? How do we end up as...
I would beg to differ here that my ancestors came here in a slave boat. They didn't. They came from the island of Jamaica, and they came on their own because they thought it was a better place to be than Jamaica.
How did they get to Jamaica? They came as slaves to Jamaica. I was born in Trinidad. That's where the slave ship dropped them. We're all slaves. We're all slaves.
We can't solve this one.
Jamaica, who did you decide to drop in Jamaica? The white man dropped you in Jamaica and brought you to Mississippi. So you don't define yourself by the enemy?
No, I define myself as the fighting place is where I'm at. Not where I used to be or where I thought I was.
So if you were fighting on a slave ship,
am I?
so if you're fighting on a slave ship, we fought on the slave ships. We fought on the slave ships. Did you call yourself a warder?
And you're still fighting in 1989, right here in New York City.
Until Africa is free, we won't be free.
All right, one final practical note. Mr. Winter, you're the only editor here. How should the media deal with this? As you can see, there's a debate over the issue. What about newspapers, television, books, magazines? I mean, should they continue to use, Haki said he was going to continue to use both. I mean, what kind of guidance do you think should apply there?
Well, speaking immediately for newspapers, and again, while I don't represent directly the Wall Street Journal here, I can tell you that they have discussed this issue recently and concluded that they will wait and watch to take the general standard of what comes to be common usage among black people in general, as at least we'll call it now, and moreover among academics and political and social leaders and that sort of thing. And if a consensus appears to emerge, then style changes will probably be forthcoming at our paper. And I believe in fact the New York Times has said similar things, which is about all they can do, because to them it's, well, there's something going on there in the community and we don't really know what to make of it. All they want to know is that they really don't want to offend anyone in the end. If it becomes apparent that everybody wants this, then they'll likely go along, although they will use people of color in the media as sounding boards to make the decision.
Well, I'm sorry, we'll just have to wait and watch.
All right, guys.